I'd like to talk about individuality's role within Overwatch and within hero shooters in general, both in terms of game balance and in terms of play style and basically how you play the game optimally. So you see, Overwatch is a 5v5 game or 6v6, depending on the mode that you're playing. And I don't know if you know this, but that's actually quite a small amount of players compared to, say, football or something like that. Real sports that are played in real life. Those games tend to have like 10, 11 players per team. And so when you have as few as 5 players, that's a very condensed, more focused experience than these other, like traditional sports. So why this is important is just off of the base fact that there's a small amount of players in these games. That forces individuality to become much more prominent. And individual skill variation, let's say in a ranked game, let's say you're playing competitive or whatever, and you have one player who's worse, one player who's better, those differences are much more exaggerated than, let's say, in football, let's say hockey or whatever. These other games with larger player sizes tend to wash out the individual impact that you can have. I think the stat is something like most football players have like a minute or two. I think it might be even less on the ball every game. So why this is relevant to game balance is if you make heroes or if you make the game tilted away from individuality, you start to run into issues. Now, the reason why they tilt away and they try to reduce individuality in these games is probably because they do recognize that there's so few players in a team. And so therefore they want to incentivize you to work together, like you want to synergize with other people and stuff. Um, but I feel like this is, if anything, detrimental actually, because what it does is it tends to force a more reactive, slower gameplay, which isn't well suited towards these smaller team sizes. When you have these smaller team sizes, subconsciously you're thinking, "Oh, I want to be very high impact. I want to do a lot of stuff," rather than I just want to, position myself slowly and make these like slow decisions. When you make the game forcibly, artificially slower, you start to run into this subconscious conscious divide where consciously you're supposed to be playing slower, but subconsciously you still want to be very high impact because you see, oh, there's only 4 other players in my team, there's only 5 other players in my team. Now that's just the psychological factor of it. Also, just gameplay wise, these games are a lot faster paced and a lot more involved mechanically than, let's say, a traditional sport. I suppose that's debatable, but because you're shooting enemies and you're using abilities, these very fantastical things, which are a bit more expressive and a bit more dynamic, and you're moving around a lot, uh, you tend to feel like you should be doing a lot of individual stuff as well. You should be very active. So when you're forced to be more reactive, more synergy based, yeah, again, it creates another psychological divide between your intuition and your conscious decision making. Now, how is this done? How is this um, force of synergy like applied? Like, how do they make it so that you have to be more synergistic? Well, they usually do this by either forcing specialization or by making like certain base elements stronger. So this could be done through like making healing really strong. If you make healing really strong, well, now you have to depend on your healers because the healers, they provide so much powerful value. If you make DPS really strong, then you have to depend on your DPS. If you make the sustain of a tank really strong and they're, presence really strong, well, now you have to depend on the tank. Yeah, again, I understand why they would want to kind of push a game more towards this direction. This is also seen in Marvel Rivals, of course. But it's very questionable how much this actually benefits the game. If you, as an individual, are feeling like you're not actually having impact on the game and you're not able to be proactive, it comes down to that psychological thing of you want to be the decider because this game or this genre of games has a smaller team size. So from the face of it, you're getting advertised, oh, I want to, I'm going to be like 20% of this team's total value, but why can't I create 20% of this team's total value? What's going on there? Additionally, another reason why they try and force synergy to be stronger is to stop Smurf type experiences, stop it so that Smurfs and like high school players can't oppress a lobby. Yeah, again, I would say this is quite a silly philosophy to have because, imagine if you said to Messi or Ronaldo or whatever, we're gonna make you run slower because you're too oppressive to the other players. It's just silly. It's just like, why? You're targeting these players because you feel like they're too strong, or like, okay, you have like some personal hatred towards skilled players. And in particular in Overwatch, we see this with a shift towards what you could call positional spike gameplay. So before, in Overwatch 1, a lot of the game was focused on the control of resources. So if you controlled resources, were more efficient with your resources and baited resources, all these types of things, you would basically be able to soft carry a game simply through that, because if you can control all the resources going around on both teams, your team, the enemy team, you're now able to kind of stack the advantages in your favor. Now, in Overwatch 2, they've really kind of reduced this capacity because now everything is done through spike damage, spike healing, these types of things, and these spike resources tend to be so strong that the push and pull of these resources kind of becomes irrelevant to the act of simply hitting the resources and staying alive. So if you can just stay alive for a long period of time and consistently hit spike resources, a good example would be Freya, the newest hero in Overwatch, who she has a lot of movement and stuff, but she has the ability to just do a lot of damage with this like spike crossbow shot she has. And her whole playstyle is stay alive, stay alive, stay alive, do a spike of damage in a pretty good position, stay alive, stay alive, stay alive. Now that's not that insane. We saw that in Overwatch 1 as well, but the emphasis on this is so much more in Overwatch 2 than it was in Overwatch 1, that everything else surrounding that, like, kind of, if anything, that was just a single playstyle in Overwatch 1. Now that single playstyle is like everything. The whole game is basically dependent on this single playstyle. And the best tanks are the tanks that can do this the most. The best tanks are the tanks that can enable this the most. The best supports are the supports who can enable this the most. Kiriko, for example, is a very good example because she has a teleport, so very high mobility. Yeah, again, a spike resource. She has a cleanse, which is a spike resource. She has her kunais, which are a kind of a soft spike resource. They're not that crazy, but they are strong. And then she also has her ultimate, but her ultimate is it's strong in general, but it's not necessarily a spike resource. So her whole playstyle is using her TP and her cleanse, and also her healing talismans, which are not fully a spike resource, but they're similar. Using them as consistently as possible with the best timings as possible. There's not really much thought placed into how am I going to bait out these resources and stuff. If anything, that's kind of a bad thing to do on Kiriko, because now you're going to run the risk that you're going to die by trying to bait out these resources, maybe take a duel, whatever. Um, and then because you're dead now, you're not able to land your spike resources. You're not able to land your TP and your cleanse and all this stuff. Now, all of that spike resource business forces the game to become more reactive and more synergy based, because if you as a DPS, you as a support, you as a tank, are basically playing this very passive, I'm just going to survive, land a spike resource, survive. Um, well, everything is now dependent upon whether or not your supports or whether or not your, basically the rest of your team are going to allow you to do that. Because if your team doesn't allow you to do that, let's say you have a Cassidy and you're playing Kiriko, and the Cassidy doesn't peel for you correctly when you TP to him or whatever, well, now you lose because of that. So the game gets shifted more and more towards negative value, where mistakes are more impactful than plays, because again, you're not trying to control the resources, you're not trying to force duels or anything. You're just trying to survive very reactively and avoid mistakes, essentially. And then also you're depending on the synergy of other people. Now, this basically means that, or the eventual conclusion that I came to was, you really should be trying to maximize agency, as I call it, on every single hero design in order to avoid this situation. You want to maximize agency. And you also want to maximize agency through the individual personality of the hero. Now, what do I mean by agency and what do I mean by personality? Agency refers to how much individual expression and individual impact and control you have over the game. If a character doesn't have agency and they're too dependent on synergy, then they start to feel quite clunky and quite frustrating to play, because again, you have no proactivity. You're not actively trying to create situations. You're not actively trying to create a win condition. You're instead just passively trying to survive, and then if something happens, that's unfortunate. And then also, by the act of survival, you then can try and put yourself in positions where you can land spike resources. So agency, this individual expression, this individual power, cures a lot of this frustration that you have, because if you're playing, let's say, Tracer, who's a relatively high agency hero, or even, like some of the hit scan, and I'm just referring to DPS because they're the easiest to explain with this. If you're playing these high agency heroes, the amount of impact you can have, though it's not necessarily higher than other heroes who have higher synergy value, it's higher in the sense that you don't need to depend on other people. And keep in mind, to the first point I made, there's not many players on your team. There's not many people to depend on. So being able to rely on yourself as opposed to other people for, the majority of your value, let's say 70% at least of your value, really makes the game feel a lot better. A great example, like I said, is Tracer or these hit scans, who have, various tools which allow them to maybe force a duel, maybe force a win condition, maybe a pulse bomb, maybe a good rail shot, maybe some kind of movement ability. I'm not saying that these heroes are, maybe the ideal perfect form of Overwatch or Marvel Rivals or anything, but I'm just saying you want to lean towards agency. And then by personality, the other half of this, what I mean by that is you want individual creative variation between the heroes. You don't want just, every hero to be Tracer. You don't want every hero to be Sojourn. You don't want every hero to be Freya. You want, each of these heroes to be interesting in their own way and create agency in their own form. A great example is Mercy, oddly enough, because Mercy at one time had a ability or a passive, I believe it's called triage. And triage basically meant that if you healed a critical health teammate, they would get like a burst of healing. So instead of being like 10 healing per second, I don't know the exact. It might be a lot higher, but you do like double the amount of healing for 1 second. So this is a way to create agency, and you can also see this in like heroes like Anna who have similar abilities. Anna has her nade, she has her sleep, she has her nano, all these very high agency things. And you can also say that, well, character like Anna is very popular, so maybe players kind of prefer it. So even on heroes like Mercy, who are very synergistic, like they have damage boost and whatever, there are ways to design them to have more agency. And you should always try to do this, because if a character can have more agency, they're gonna fit into the format of 5v5, 6v6, whatever, a lot better. This game isn't 10v10, so you don't have as many players to synergize with. So it just makes sense to lean towards your kind of strength as a format and make it more agency based. That's basically my theory. That's my whole idea. Thank you for watching.